And we can get started on the super exciting versioning discussion. All right, so a little context. Kyle, feel free to jump in at any time. PatternFly Elements is a monorepo. So we have all of our components in an elements directory, and then we've got our base class in that same directory. What kind of complicates versioning and why we've kind of been going back and forth and wanted to have a larger discussion about it is we are using Lerna, and we're trying to decide how we version individual components versus versioning the base class. And I've addressed a couple of the like more granular questions here in these 4 use cases, which we can review. But does anyone have any additional kind of like background information they want to share? I could also pull up my VS Code and just show the repo format as well, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think seeing the repo would be nice for context.
Okay, we do that.
Should we do introductions? I haven't met some of the people on the call.
Oh, true.
Yeah.
You want to just go down to business? Yeah, we do
business.
But you got to go first now, Kyle. It's your idea.
Hey, I'm Kyle. I originally started a project called Elements with Michael Clayton, but it has since changed names. It's now PatternFly Elements, and we did our 1.0 back in December, so that was like extremely exciting time. And I'm really excited to get to see you guys because I know that some of us have had conversations on Twitter, or I've seen some of you at conferences before, and it's just really nice to kind of get the band back together and talk about versioning. So I'm excited to see you guys.
Yeah. Cool. Then yeah, I can just go next. Hey, I'm Thomas. I am sort of probably known for introducing the Lion web components from ING. We have very similar problems than what you are having with versioning. And so I think it will be interesting to see in which direction you will be going, and maybe we can also bring in some of our experiences. And yeah, we also have been using Lerna before, so we probably can feel some of the pain points you're having right now. Yeah, and I'm from Austria, so probably quite a few different time zones here. That's also very interesting.
Yeah, it's real hard to find a time slot that works for like everybody. We had some folks in Australia who were like, "Oh, sad, I can't attend." I'm like, sorry. All the places, but I love being a global company. That is awesome. I'll do mine real quick. I'm Cassandra, Catastrophe on Twitter and GitHub. Working with Kendall Totten. She's down here on my board. And we do kind of a design system for Red Hat. One of many, but we're working on like coalescing that with PatternFly Elements and kind of making the solution that works for everybody, because web components are amazing and can totally fill that. We started working with Kyle and Michael, who is also my house partner, life partner person, Michael Clayton, and have just kind of like been working on building this thing that works for applications and for marketing sites, and kind of addressing that like brochureware app vibe. How do we get between both worlds? And that's where like Kendall and I kind of brainstormed on theming and came up with all of these like CSS variable approaches with empty hooks and all this goodness. So that's kind of where we're coming at it from. And then getting into the weeds with some of the like CI right now is my world, and GitHub Actions are amazing. If you haven't checked them out, I highly recommend it.
I'll jump in real quick because I'm new to the team. Brian and I used to be partners in crime over at Penn State. We were working on the Hacks project together, and then Kendall and Cassandra stole me over to Red Hat. So excited to get going.
I can go next. Hey all, I'm Salem Cobalt. I'm currently at Knapsack. So before coming to Knapsack about 8 months ago, I was at Pegasystems running the Bolt Design System team. I was there for 4 years, loved every moment of it, built a boatload of web component and twig-based, and decided, hey, it's about time to close up shop and go up to the next level, which is design systems for design systems. That's what I'm doing right now as principal front-end architect, engineer at Knapsack. And I've seen most of you guys at conferences and Twitters and all the things. So
this is kind of like a mini conference right here. I'm Michael Clayton. I work with Kyle. For Kyle, we started the Relevance project about 3 years ago, like you said. I'll claim responsibility for getting us into the mess that necessitated this meeting, having set up Lerna and gone halfway into conventional commits to the point where we're using the standard, but we're not actually using any of the tooling. So we just have a huge history of commit messages that mostly adhere to conventional commits, but we're not using any tooling to actually make use of it yet. And trying to figure out, is that where we want to go? And we'll get into the questions later. I can go on. So yeah, I'll turn it over.
I could kind of just coast on Cassandra's intro. So I'll just say I'm Kendall Totten. I'm a manager of front-end development for redhat.com. And I'm just here for the free pizza. There's going to be pizza, right?
Ooh, awkward.
It's on the way. Just keep
So there's
waiting.
no pizza?
Oh.
I'm going to coast on your intro. I'm just observing here. I'm a front-end developer on one of the Red Hat properties. Kyle's my boss. He's all the way in the corner for me. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of creep on your conversation. So ignore me.
Yeah, I guess I can go next. I'm actually a team member of Thomas. I also work at ING. I'm part of the Lion team, and I actually think probably Thomas set up Lerna, and I was the one who who changed it from Lerna to a different system. It's called Change Sets. So I have quite some experience with migrating from Lerna to Change Sets and also using GitHub Actions with it. And I'm one of 3 guitar players, it seems, at least 3.
For me, playing is kind of a stretch. I hold it and kind of bang on it.
Owners of guitars. I'll go next. I'm BTO Pro, Brian Olandike. I work at Penn State on something called Hacks the Web. It's my life's mission to eliminate the need for this conversation to ever happen again for anyone on the planet Earth. Mars, optional, but happy to be here.
So I'm Benny. I'm a teammate with Thomas and Joran on OpenWC, but I don't work for ING. In my day job, I'm writing like SPAs using GraphQL and web components. So right now I'm managing an open source library, Apollo Elements, with Lerna as well. It's not a design system, but a lot of the concerns are similar. And in a previous life, I also managed sort of like a JavaScript library of web components design system, also using Lerna. So I also feel your pain on that. And I've been learning a lot in the past, in the recent past, from Joran's work with Lion that we've also ported over to some of our repos in OpenWC. So I'm hoping we can share some of that with you. And I'm a bit more of a Gentoo man than Red Hat, but I hope you won't take that personally. That's all I got to say.
There was a guy who sat right behind me when we were still in the office who ran Gentoo. So
my people.
It's Linux fans. It's not just Fedora and Rail fans.
You almost sounded like he doesn't exist anymore, Michael. He used to survive.
Well, I think he switched to
Arch. We don't
Arch.
want to talk about it. Oh.
He's still alive.
All right, well, I'm going to jump in with my, let's see, where's my VS Code? My VS Code is not in here. VS Code, I'll just share my whole screen. I hate when you can't just do a particular app. All right. This is WebRage. I want PatternFly Elements. Here is our structure, just to get everybody acquainted with the format that we're talking about here. This is our monorepo PatternFly Elements hosted on GitHub, and I will share links out as well. If someone is able, if you could throw it in the doc too, that'd be great, to the GitHub. So we have an elements directory, and inside of our elements directory, we have all of our components, and every component uses PatternFly as the base class. So here's PatternFly, and this is our base web component, and then everything else extends this. Also kind of throwing in the complexity here, a lot of them use PFE SAS as a dependency, which is just all of our like maps and tooling and shared language and design system info. So this is also a dependency of all of the components. So like if I pull up the package JSON on modal, for example, you can see, make it a little bigger. We have PatternFly as a dependency, and then as a dev dependency, we have PFE SAS. So all of that kind of adds to our few of our questions around versioning, although I didn't call out PFE SAS by name in the doc, and I probably should have. So now I'll switch back to the doc. And
can I ask a very specific question?
Mm-hmm.
Are you all using fixed or independent versioning with Lerna?
I'm mostly using independent versioning.
Okay.
And both in the design projects, the design system projects, and also in my libraries.
Okay, so just quick, I guess, sort of aside, if anyone doesn't know the difference, independent versioning will version each specific piece. So if you change just the button and the button doesn't have any related dependencies, the button would bump up version versus fixed. You know, you have an Windows 95, Windows 98, you don't care about each of the pieces that make up the whole package.
But if you have a sibling that relies on the button, like you have like button and super button, so then like super button will also get a bump, right?
Precisely. So it takes that little bit of behavior from independent versioning, but it doesn't bump the version if it doesn't have to, basically. One other thing that I just quick glance through PatternFly Elements' repo. So y'all are using npm still for you know, installing all of your front-end dependencies, which I think actually might make your Lerna reliance a little bit more trickier than it maybe it could be. Like Yarn workspaces, and now npm I think supports this as well. Took a lot, like when we made the move from npm to Yarn on the Bolt design system, also using Lerna, I remember that making that move took a lot of the reliance on Lerna's specifics by just using like the native Yarn workspace behavior. So symlinking, that piece especially. So we got the benefits of, you know, faster installs, but also instead of Lerna having to do all of the symlinking, Lerna really just became a tool that looked at this package is using this other package as a dependency and orchestrating the versioning when it came time to actually bump it.
So I love where you're going with this, but I want to pause because I want to talk about the things that we're solving for before we get into solutioning. So tooling and all of that, great, but I want to talk through what we're solving, and then we'll migrate into that.
Cool.
So first up is kind of the obvious use case, which is the base class has a major breaking change and needs to bump to 2.0. So I just, you know, posited a couple of questions around that. Do all of our components at that point need to bump to 2.0? Does Lerna allow some components to depend on 1.0 and others to point to 2.0? And that's kind of a tooling question that I wasn't aware of. I didn't do the research on that yet. And then would we need a separate branch for 1.0 after a 2.0 bump is created? So if PatternFly as a base class is bumped to 2.0, does that mean we now have the main branch is 2.0, but then do we need to open up like a 1.0 patches branch essentially that we just are going to be pushing fixes to. Do you want me to run through each item and then we'll go back through and talk through them, or do you guys want to take it one at a time?
I would take it one at a time. I think the first question is already can raise a lot of discussion.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What do consumers use?
Do we now vote, or how does
We just give input.
Yeah, bump everything. That's who's with me?
I think we already had an interesting comment by Salem saying there's this fixed and there's independent, but there's even another one that's maybe even more common, which is that, yes, they're independent versions, but if there's a dependent in your monorepo, for example, everything depends on the core components, like the PF element or something, that will mean that if the PF element has for example, a major version bump, it probably means that all the other components are incompatible now and need a bump as well. So that if the end user uses a PF element button, for example, they need a bump for the button to get the 2.0 from the core component.
You know, I was thinking just now about the learn it independent, and I correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're going to get a patch version on the dependent when you launch the base class, right? This is the case that problematic. Like if the core breaking change, if the breaking change in the base class affects the public API of the dependent, so then that should also be a breaking change on the dependent, right, on the button. But Lerna might automatically make that patch. I was thinking about that because of my experience earlier today writing change sets and how you get to choose, like, for each package what type of bump it is.
Yeah. Gosh. So what tool did we use? I want to try to put a pin on myself regarding tooling just yet. I mean, major breaking change. If a button, if PatternFly Elements' base class has a major breaking change and the button has to bump up in order to use that new base class, the base class gets the major version bump and also the button. Otherwise, the button would break.
So I have a practical real world example I can share that might help kind of ground this. So we recently switched all of our components. We were in pre-release, so we weren't really impacted by this versioning discussion, but we changed all of our components to use a property system instead of kind of ad hoc doing it like we were before. We're kind of doing the more vanilla web component approach, and we leaned a little bit more into the like lit world where we were defining properties in a getter. So that required updating every component to use the properties system and deprecating our previous system, which was kind of more schema driven. So we had schemas that were defining attributes, and then those attributes are being imported through JavaScript and attached to the component that way. So we kind of ported that over. Now, every component did not have to be updated at once. So in theory, if we had been versioning at the time, we could have done PF element 2.0 and then upgraded, let's say, nav to use PF element 2.0 as a base that uses the property system now, but maybe all of our other components were not ready to update yet. And so those continue to be dependent on core 1.0. And so that's kind of where this question comes from, right? So if the base class has a major breaking change, but not every component necessarily needs to opt into that right away, or we want to do a more like spaced approach, how do we kind of tackle that? Or does every component have to be updated when a major breaking change comes through on the base class?
The rule of thumb I've seen is you only need to patch dependents if the change is incompatible. So for example, if the button depends with a fixed version on the base class, you definitely need to patch it, because it will be seen as incompatible, but not necessarily with the same kind of bump. So the core might bump with a major bump, but you might be able to not break the public API of the button, and then the button only needs like a patch, for example.
You could do a workaround, and it's only when you remove that workaround that it does the major version bump. So downstream actual design system consumption. Do you know if teams typically are using like a single version, like everyone's using 1.2 of all of the components from PatternFly? Or is it like, hey, I'm using 1.2 of the button and 1.1.3 of the card? Like, how does the consumption look?
It's a mixed bag. We have, for certain sites, we want everyone to be on latest. So for lots of the content sites, things where we're in control of what's being used where, we just really want them on latest. But then on the app side, like in Ivana's world, she works on catalog.redhat.com, they will bump us to a specific version. So they might have 1.3 of button, 1.2 of navigation, and 1.1 of PF element. So it's really kind of we're all over the board with how our consumers would be pulling these in.
Yeah, I think a great example is .com. We updated our other components versions, but we wanted to stay at a particular version of nav because the way that we had implemented it, the dot change had a bug on production, and so we weren't going to introduce that bug. And so we stayed at like 1.1 or whatever it was. It wasn't 1.0 at the time. I think it was a pre-release. But that was a good example of like everything else was at a higher version, but we kind of kept nav static because of a like environment specific bug.
Totally. I know one challenge I ran into quite a bit working with the different Drupal teams at Pega was, we started off with each component was individually versioned to really get that granularity. And the feedback we kept getting over and over was, this is too complicated from a consumer standpoint. Like, how do I know technically speaking, the 1.2 button and the 1.3 card should work just fine, technically. But given that from a design system, maintainer standpoint, we just couldn't test every possible combination of the pieces. It made a lot more sense for us, at least, to simplify the consumption, which was if you're using 1.3, we generally recommend using 1.3 if there is a 1.3. Otherwise, it's like latest, just to keep the moving parts, I think, a little bit more manageable. So it was actually a lot less about technical reasons why we would. While we switched our learner versioning, it was actually more just about governance and making that adoption easier from consumers.
Hey, Thomas, what's consumer, or what is the consumption like at ING? Like, what are your developers doing as far as implementing?
Yeah, we're sort of taking this away for our users, because we have a single version that we distribute, and then we pick the versions of Lion. So we have sort of a more, like, there could be situations where you can have special needs, where you need only a specific component, but in ING, like, it's usually not needed. So we just have one bag of sort of like that pulls in everything. And this has a version, and this is basically, the same thing. It's like our users, they just wanna, especially if there are multiple teams needing to align on a version, they just say, hey, I'm using version 1.2, and then they get 1.2, and then they can just align it with the other teams. But if they all need to align with 10 different components, it's impossible. Yeah. And that's basically, we had this, I think, 2 or 3 years ago with this component set that we had before. There we had this maintenance hell, we called it. It was it was impossible to align versions.
And then the design system team ends up getting bogged down by, oh crap, we can't update and get rid of our own technical debt because now we're having to juggle all these other things.
Yeah. It does feel like, if you say, here's, like you said, here's all the things in the bag. It feels like, from a design system perspective, if we're trying to keep a brand moving all at the same direction at the same time, if everyone's using the same fixed version, we can basically assume that the design system will look similar across a universe of sites.
So you could be using an older version of the design system, but at least that older version, all the pieces look consistent versus
Right.
if you've got version differences, the button might look way out of place because that combination of pieces wasn't really intended to get used that way.
Right.
So we're very lucky to have our design system guru on the call, Corey. Did you want to share anything with us about like how you've been thinking about versioning for the individual components in the design system? Have you been thinking about it as like the kit is a version, or have you been thinking about individual pieces of the kit having their own versions?
Well, I think prior to the site, prior to our site, I think it was all just one version because we were running toward completing the site, working with the upstream community PatternFly, and but I think now that you guys are on 1.0 and the kit has been already well established, I think we are going to start versioning our components now that, I mean, they're all complete from like the design side, and whatever other changes that come to those components from user testing, or if PatternFly makes a breaking change to one of theirs, we have to do the same. Yeah, I think that's all that we've thought about it for now, I think.
Yeah, and I love the idea of getting to a place where our versions are somewhat in sync with, if not directly in sync with, the versions that you have in the kit.
Yeah, I think, yeah, absolutely. That would be, I think that is kind of the goal for all design systems across the enterprise.
Sometimes I think the challenge becomes like, what is a visual breaking change versus a code breaking change? And like, how do we, or even just a minor change, right? Like if we've got a patch, it's like something might just be code related.
Absolutely.
And so it doesn't necessarily have to bump in the kit, but then how do we communicate those things back and forth on our different versions,
Yeah, I mean, I feel like some of our components will probably never change. I mean, they're optimized for like interaction, accessibility, whatever it is, and they'll never ever change unless we get some direction from above.
Rebrand, color refresh, stuff from above can happen, even if it doesn't always seem likely on the ground.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. See, here's the challenge is like the way our system is written, color changes and stuff wouldn't be something that would impact us because that would go in the theme, which is not even in the repo.
Yeah.
I suppose if PatternFly core completely changed their colors, we'd probably bump ours in PatternFly Elements as well. And then we'd have to talk about if that's a breaking change, like what visual changes equal breaking changes versus code breaking changes, right?
Yeah.
That's a whole other bag of worms.
That's an existential question. So have we covered all the main points for this first big use case?
Maybe just one thing that I was a little bit, maybe another question, so to say, that goes in the same direction. I think as has been told, it's not necessarily required that if your core changes, that your component has a major change as well. That really depends on the API, on the API what you expose. So I think there's not an answer. It's not a yes or no question. Like it really depends on your API and on your case. So that's probably impossible to give a technical justification to have a rule here.
Yeah.
And we are trying. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
That touches on one thing that I've thought about, like using conventional commits occasionally is, and Lerna too. Like I guess Lerna, not conventional commits. Yeah, when you use Lerna to do version bumps, if you bump a package, anything that depends on that package will also get bumped, even if the API that it's using didn't change. So it's like going a little bit beyond what you might need, but it's like kind of a good enough approximation. Like
it's a little it's a little bit more like it eagerly will bump up versus being a little bit more conservative.
And so that made me think of kind of maybe there's this principle. I'll just throw out this principle I was thinking of. Maybe that might be true. If we were to bump everything on every change, like fixed version, every change, that's good for maintainers, because then you can say, like, okay, this group of components, like version 470, we know that they work together.
Everything
we never have to think about like, does 470 work, like, of the base class work with 471 of the card? You never have to think about that, but it's terrible for consumers. And so like consumers would probably prefer the absolute minimum number of version bumps. So like only when there's an absolutely necessary version bump does it get bumped. Does that sound like the kind of like the principle that we're trying to navigate here?
I it's two sides, right? Like on the one side, the consistent versions is good for consumers because it's clear. But on the other side, if I see a version bump in a package that's in my project, I'm testing the heck out of it, no matter what the version bump is. Like I'm gonna maybe assume that it's not a breaking change and try and like just do a spot check if it's a minor bump, but I'm still testing it. Now, what a waste of my time if we've minor bumped card, but really it's because button had an update. Now here I am in my project, just kind of like spot checking card, but nothing changed in card. So, I mean, I have to be diligent then as a consumer of the project to read the changelog in detail and say, oh, was there a change to card in this?
Yeah,
like that puts a lot of pressure on me.
Empty in that case. Like,
and then there's resistance from the consumers, like, oh man, do I really have to update? I say there's card and button have updates, but I don't want to break my website.
Yeah, and you're assuming that buttons changes are not going to impact your leveraging of card. Like Nikki will have our color library is a mix-in to the rest of our elements. A minor change in that could have catastrophic changes in a card, and we don't realize it till I'm using the card.
Yeah, it definitely can. But my point is just that it's not guaranteed. Like using a system like Lerna, it's just like it doesn't matter what the change is.
Yeah.
If it changes, all of its dependents change.
I will say, to Brian's point, I don't think we're in as much risk of that because we do list like PFE SAS as a dependency. And so if that did have a change, it would bump anything that lists it as a dependency. So if we do a bump on some mix-in, everything's going to get a bump either way. The kind of downside with that is like you might not use that mix-in in that component and you're getting a bump. But I mean, there's no way to granularly say like, who's using this mix-in that I updated? But we do, like, because of the way we've got it separated out, a change in button, I feel pretty confident, like 99% confident it's not going to impact card because it's not listed as a dependency in card. So stuff like that I'm less concerned about impacting each other because I know that they work separately and together in that context, whatever the version is.
Yeah, what's also good to, like, I know Lerna, like, it bumps every dependent, but you could also think there's other tools, like for example ChangeSet. It has a little bit different logic in that it only bumps the dependent if it, for example, depends on the dependency with a fixed version. Then you have to patch it because the user, if it installs the button and it depends with a fixed version on core and you update its core, then the user will never get the updated core by getting the button unless the button patches itself. So that's a tricky thing. And if you use a caret, for example, it's not needed because then the button will get the latest core. So there's Lerna is a little bit rigid in that. Yeah.
No, I think it's cautious. It's just like I publish.
Yeah.
Here's the other
one thing that we just discussed here or said again is like what is with log files? Because what often happens is like your users have log files, and then if you don't pump the package, then like their dependencies don't get updated, and then suddenly you end up with a situation that you have like 5 different core inside of your nested node modules, and that's also not what you want. So it's really like a balancing act, like
trade-offs, reward versus risk. Yeah.
I just want to mention, like, we can't load multiple base classes is the other trick, right? Like, you can't have multiple versions of PathElement.js on your page. You can only have one version. Whichever one you load last will win.
Yeah,
That's
that's
a feature,
whichever
not a
one
bug.
is last one registered is your base class.
Yeah. So having components on the page that have different base class requirements is a big issue for us, especially if it's a breaking change.
Yeah, it
It's
depends
worth
on
at this point mentioning the
how it's
scope
handled.
custom elements registry standard, which is on its way.
Ooh,
And there's been some work on the polyfills as well. They're not exactly production ready, but they're not that far off either. So that's something that's worth considering more like an, I guess, an enterprisey kind of a situation, not necessarily on sort of like your landing page or whatever, but in cases where you genuinely do need, button version 0.1 and card version, 17. There could be ways to accomplish that.
One page, different teams, different versions each team is stuck to, using for reasons. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and
I would love to read more about that. Can you drop a link to the spec for that in our resources? That would be wonderful. I had not heard of that yet.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Yoran just dropped a link in the chat. Thanks.
Yeah, we actually use this in INV, and we have like 2 major versions of our library, and it's used by multiple teams with different upgrade cycles. So usually there's an application, and it's maintained by, let's say, 10 teams, and like only 5 of those teams updated to the latest version, and the other ones still using the older version. But they're using the same component, like there is only one ing input, and on this page, ing input is version 1.5, and on this page, ing input is version 2.6. And it can even be on the same page. You can use the same custom element.
What's good to note, though, is that this will solve the custom elements conflict, the custom elements registry conflict. But it could be that you have some other things where you don't want 2 base classes on the same page, so for some other reason. In Lion, we have some reasons for that, for example, and this is why in Lion, all our packages are dependent with a fixed version on one another, so that we never have multiple installs of the same Lion package. So
Is that repo public, perchance, or is that an internal repo?
I'll share it.
Okay, I'd love to see that approach, like how to roll it all up.
But later I can give a demo on how we on Lion and how our release cycle works, if you want.
I actually had a bit of advice. It was the last question in the first section. Do we need to maintain separate branches for like a 1.0 versus 2.0? From experience, so let's just say the team hits 2.0. There's great celebration, yay, and then 1.5 has a bug that was flagged. Originally, we were thinking, all right, separate ongoing branches to help with maintenance. Turned out that was kind of overkill and just extra work on our end. So GitHub tags are your friend here, or just git tags. So let's just say you're on 2.0, the main branch is 2.0 plus indefinitely. If there is a bug flag that requires a 1.something release, you pull down that particular tag, create a new branch that will implement the fix. And then that gets released with a very specific. I know it's going to be 1.5.2 whatever. So you still have that retroactive ability to put out patches, but it also sort of incentivizes that, hey, all of the main changes moving forward are going to be on that main branch, and it's only as needed that you would go back and do a patch for a much older major version.
I have a question about that process when you've had to do that. and you check out the 1.0 tag and make a branch.
Yeah.
I guess my question is your release script or automation, your release process, can it be run from any branch? Because we have ours kind of locked into a master. Eventually, we're going to switch to main, and that's really the only branch that you can release from.
Right. So think about it like this: you can't actually even, if you check out 1.5.2, you can't do your PR off of that git tag. You still have to create a branch like this is the 1.5.2 branch based off of the tag. Branch off of that, do your fix, and then it'll get back onto the 1.5.2 sort of main branch. I mean, just at least for us, I can't say this is going to be true for everyone, but at least for us, it happens so infrequently. We didn't want to overly complicate our CI for this really rare event. Yeah. So, the main branch, or at the time it was still master, that's what runs Lorna, the conventional commits, get our change logs generated, and then Otto took, it's the tool I put in the chat, Otto took the PR labels that we assigned, took those into account to figure out, all right, I've got 5 different changes. Ultimately, which version should I release at the end of this? It happens so rarely that we had to put out a patch for like a major version change, or the previous major version needed a patch. We just manually did the release in the very few handful of times that actually was required, rather than overly complicate the CI to account for that.
But it definitely depends on your,
we can do it quite easily because we have our ING design system is V1 and V2. So, and we maintain V1 and V2 at the same time. We just V2 V1 branch. If there's a patch, we do a pull request to the V1 branch, and the CI responds to any pull requests or any pushes to master and V1. And it releases from either.
Nice.
That's what I was thinking. Like with the CI we've got for GitHub Actions, like we could set up support for a separate branch if we found that there was enough need. Because I mean, there's always a conversion path, right? Like people are going to be at 1.0 for a while before they're ready to jump to 2.0. We want to make sure that any bug fixes get into 1.0 and 2.0, at least for that like period of time where we support it. In fact, it's probably good to socialize like, this is how long we're going to support 1.0. So make sure you've migrated by like Q4 or something.
It's like the long-term support. Yeah.
Especially if you want to get contributions, it's really useful to have a branch, because then you can say, hey, just make a pull request to the V1 branch instead of to main. But like, I think the matter, it's still, you need to decide if it's worth it or not. It really depends.
Yeah, maybe not long-term, but I could see a short-term benefit.
I mean, in our experience, we had the version 1 released about 2 years ago and version 2 about a year ago. And we still, from time to time, need to do V1 changes. And we get pull requests to V1 because for most of the things we say, hey, like V1 is in sort of maintenance. And if you want to fix something or change something, then please, do it to solve your own problem. And we just look at the merge request and merge it if needed. And then to have the branch ready and just needing to merge it, and then the CI automatically releasing it without you needing to manually step in and make sure everything is correctly released is really helpful.
Well, we are running short on time, so I'm just gonna like race through these last use cases just to make sure we've got them in the back of our mind. So we've talked through the core component having a major breaking change. There's also, of course, the minor update to the core, where let's say it's bumping to 1.1, and the question of whether all of the components that depend on it should also get a minor version bump at that time, or if it's irrelevant. Does a version bump on an individual component need to match? So if an individual component bumps to 1.2, does PatternFly Element need to bump to 1.2, I guess is the question. So that's use case number 2. Use case number 3 being if there is no change to the base class, an individual component needs to make a major breaking change, completely redesigned or something, you know, completely new. It needs to be 2.0, but PatternFly is still 1.0. So how do we feel about components being out there at a higher version than their other components and then the base class? And then we've got the no change to the base class, but a component has a minor version bump. And then, of course, there's the dev dependencies. So like, if PFE SaaS has a version bump, does that impact the components version as well? Some of our components have external packages. So, you know, there's marked in the markdown component. And if that has a version bump in our package, do we need to bump the component? I have already broken this, and then I have bumped because we have Dependabot, and Dependabot bumped marked, and I just merged it and didn't even think about the fact that we're at 1.0 now. Did I need to bump PFE Markdown? I didn't. So good questions to kind of ponder as well. These are really hard. Like,
design systems are hard, versioning is hard.
These questions are depending on your preference. So technically, they're all possible. You can link your packages to be the same you can link the packages to be the exact same version, all of your monorepository packages. But you can also choose that they have independent packages. And most tooling you can choose.
Yeah, I think the thing to consider most of all, Cassandra, is Cassie. What behavior do what behavior do you want to encourage? Really, at the end of the day, like a lot of this it depends, but do you want to, are you looking at solving the maintainer, you know, needs, the consumer needs, somewhere between the two? What's simplest to maintain, most straightforward, especially as like the contribution umbrella broadens, more folks in the org are contributing.
Yeah, but I think the point is there's pros and cons in both columns. And so we're trying to list out all of our pros and cons and see which one is best for this specific project. And, and you know, wanting to bring in like all y'all who have a lot of experience in this. And I want to hear from you, Brian. I haven't heard enough from you. And you are in a very similar structure to us. So I want to hear what you guys have gone through on this too. So, but I want to hear from y'all who have also kind of gone through this, right?
If something is radically different, like if you have radical shifts going on where something goes to 2, another thing goes to 3, what advantage is the monorepo providing at that point? If it's just to keep in sync with the PFE element version, I don't know. I mean, like those are unique beings at that point. If the entire portfolio is moving forward, or hey, we got to work on these 8 things together, and those are making a major version jump, I get it. But if you're describing needing independent major version jumps of the card and the button and whatever, and there isn't a ton of linkage between them, I actually think the monorepo is hurting you. I'd also question if you are doing fundamental changes to your base class, is it really the same base class anymore? You know, does it have to be called PFE element? Like, even if it's something dumb like PFE element 2, I'm not saying put a 2 in it, but I mean, it is a fundamentally different thing. And your code splitters are still going to discover a lot of the overlaps anyway. So I don't think it's going to be a huge difference between them. And the third thing, Polymer element did a really good job when it switched from 1 to 2 to 3 pretty quickly, of having, it was called a legacy mix-ins class. So you could actually move forward to class-based structure and mix in all of the older, slower conventions they had. And I wonder if some of your deprecation notices couldn't be solved via some form of legacy mix-in, and you tell other people, hey, if you still want to use the schema thing, yeah, just add, now you have to use this in our 2.0 or whatever. So, I mean, it also seems like your relevant base class and the SCSS are kind of like, they're kind of very different from the rest of the portfolio, right? Because everything is interwoven with them. So maybe those do have
foundation, right? So like, here's my thought. Like, I like your point about if it's something different, it's something different. Call it what it is. but I also want to be able to evolve, right? Like the spec is changing and new functionality is being made available. Maybe someday we'll get to drop IE. Who knows?
No.
But you know, that would mean we would need to evolve the base class. I want to be able to grow and evolve with that namespace though, too, right? Like I don't want to just throw it away and be like, oh, we're moving on to bigger and better things. And there's value in keeping, you know, the old stuff around if we need it. But I think I do want to be able to evolve. I mean, the rest of y'all speak up too if that's how you feel. But like, I like the idea of being able to evolve the namespace and keep like bumping that. So I do think there's value in like that 3.0, because you know, Polymer doesn't go and like rebrand itself as something else just because it
Like
does
Lit Element.
Oh, that's my
Doesn't
exception.
rebrand itself as a totally different project. Now it's going to have a big issue jumping from 2 to 3 in Lit Element. So they're going to, you know, run into a similar, right? Because you got the same name. There are breaking changes. I will be curious to see what happens there, but I get what you're going for.
You don't want to just throw away your brand, right? Like Element's our thing. Like that's our brand.
I get what you're saying. I think the rule that I like that we use is keep the major the same, because their packages belong to each other, so they're always on the same major. But minors and patches, they can vary, so they can diverge. And I don't know what Brian thinks about that, but that's worked really well for us. So you keep some coherence.
I would say maybe as long as you're being a little bit maybe more strict on if there's visual changes that are not, you know, API level changes, but you want to keep those visual changes in sync, then maybe that would be considered to be a major version bump. I think it really still comes down to what things do you want to keep in sync because they have to be, and what things are recommended to be in sync, but it's flexible. It's a little forgiving.
Can I ask a tooling question? Because I wondered if this was like in the option or in the sea of possibilities. Can you skip major versions? So if your components are jumping major versions independently because they have breaking changes, so you've got something at 2.0, 3.0, and 4.0, can your base class be the rising tide that brings everything up to 5.0 and just skips?
We had to do this on PatternLab, like the actual like PatternLab node project, because they had like 1.0, 4.0, like 7.0, like it was all over the place in the same repo. And we decided, all right, I hate this. This feels yucky, but everything is going to go to like 9.0 or whatever it was, and just to get everything on the same page and get a clean, fresh start and just fix it once.
So it sounds like that could be, I mean, that could be sort of a thing that helps keep sanity, because if your base class changes, you don't want to worry about which things work with it and which things don't. It's like everything should jump together. But you want to be honest about, hey, if I need to break something in this card, I need to communicate that to people so that they know they may have to go update their light DOM.
Yeah, there's something nice about thinking about Babel. Like Babel uses a monorepo, and they were at like version 6 for a long time. All of the the whole ecosystem manages all of 6, and none of them bumped to 7 until they all bumped to 7. Like and you, like, as a consumer of that project, I could look at a package JSON and say, like, does this look right or does it look wrong? Like, are there a few that are version 6 and a few that are version 7? And you immediately know if this isn't right. So I don't know much about how I tried to find issues where they maybe talk about how they manage that. How do they deal with, like, they're on version 6, one of the components needs a breaking change. I assume the policy is just wait, like you can't do it. You can't break change until version 7 released.
Can you come up with a workaround that stinks from a maintainer standpoint, but from a consumer, you don't force that major version bump until you absolutely have to?
I assume that's what they do. Yeah.
Like with Nav, he's working on Nav. We've been calling it Nav 2.0, but he's supporting the old markup from 1.0. And so on some level, it is kind of just a feature, right? Like he's completely changed the look and feel and how the shadow DOM renders and all of that, but that doesn't impact the authors who are consuming the components, right? So like their markup looks exactly the same, if they just do a bump to nav 1.3, then they would get the new look and feel. I mean, that's an option too, is just to set a rule that says, if you upgrade the look and feel of a component, if you change a component in a significant way, you must support the old light DOM. Because ours is very like light DOM as data, right? So you have to support the old light DOM. You have to have deprecated, we've got aliasing built in. So like you have to set up deprecated aliasing attributes. And you're not able to deprecate those until the PatternFly class bumps, in which case everything goes up. So that might be something that's more of a socialized kind of convention, but just to say like, that's cool, but you can't bump a component until everything bumps.
I got a lot of pushback from the Bolt team internally at times when we had to make a call. Do we cut that major version bump, or do we take on a little bit of internal tech debt, keep things backwards compatible, and basically invest in team adoption and upgrading versus doing the nicest thing or the most convenient thing internally. And 9.5 times out of 10, we always did what would make the consumers happier than the contributors.
Yeah, I feel like, so the one bullet point on here that's always been really difficult for me is like an accordion 2.0 while PatternFly is at 1.0. And the reason for that was I guess we're kind of gluttons for punishment in that we've taken this light DOM first approach where we are big believers in progressive enhancement. If JavaScript fails or SEO or an engine is crawling the site, we want to make sure there's content there. And so in the navigation is a really good example to support a newer version of navigation. There were some light DOM changes, or at least we were expecting the structure to be a little bit different. And slots can only go so far in web components because, especially with designs and adhering to a design system, it'd be really nice to just dump everything into a slot. But all those incoming styles that you want to control, it's easier for us to, like Cassandra has been saying, read that light DOM, interpret it as the data that's coming in, and then put things where we need to in the shadow DOM. And so I think what I'm hearing is maybe our approach going forward is similar to what Wes on our team has done, where maybe there is like a transforming function that's available that can take an old version of markup and a new version of markup, deliver the same component without having to do maybe it just becomes a minor release at that point as opposed to a breaking change.
I love the saying that good code should be easy to delete. So if there's like a migration or like an adapter piece that if you're still using the older light DOM markup that gets progressively enhanced, and the team is not ready to make that big jump, there's a tool or there's an approach to have a path forward, so get the benefits of the new shiny thing, but not have to like do a ton of extra work that's not on the schedule.
And that point. Oh, go ahead, Thomas. Sorry.
I have an we have with Lion, we sort of have a privilege of not needing to do too much backwards compatibility because it's still in beta. But in ING, we use it as 1.0. So what really helped us in this case is that on Lion, we could keep the code really clean, and whenever we needed to do a breaking change, we did a breaking change. But whenever we did, we always added a backwards compatibility layer or a conversion inside the ING layer. So for our ING users, it was never a breaking change, even though it was a breaking change on Lion. So what happened is that in the ING version, like we accumulated backwards compatibility code, more and more codes, and then when we finally could do, like we sort of had an agreement that we do breaking changes only once a year. So when we finally could do the version 2, like we could just get rid of so much sort of backwards compatibility and workaround code that made the code cleaner again. And now that the next version is like getting a little bit older, we see like that we have here accumulated. So whatever major breaking change, like we then can drop a lot of the backwards compatibility sort of stuff.
I love that. I think that's such a great idea. And to be able to add it to the roadmap and say, look, the plan is we're doing a breaking change in Q4. And, you know, we want everyone to migrate by, I don't know, Q2 of the next year or something, right? Like to be able to communicate that clearly and kind of put that on the calendar and say like, tech debt, you're dying now. We use a like to-do approach where we add like to-do notes and like note deprecation there, and so it's fairly easy to like go back and find because we pull that out into a like markdown report. So it would be pretty easy to like bump stuff in that sense.
I know we're at time. Does everyone have like 60 seconds at least?
Yeah, and I do want to talk about having another discussion specifically about Lerna, because it sounded like maybe some folks had some experiences with Lerna. I don't need to be in that, but like maybe Mr. Clayton and Kyle could do that.
Yeah, it would make sense to talk about solutions as well at some point, right?
Yeah, we didn't get to that today.
So all I want to say is how much I absolutely love like these sorts of conversations, and more please, I can't get enough of these. I miss conferences, and this is the closest thing I've had like literally in a year. So thanks for putting this together.
Yeah, no problem. It was a
blast.
Thanks,
Cassandra.
Thanks a lot,
I'll reach out about solutioning, and maybe we can talk through some stuff like that. I do think internally we'll probably sit down with this information. There's some really great real world experiences stuff in this doc now, and kind of start fleshing out our like best practices that we're going to put in our documentation. But then once we've got something, I'll share it out, and maybe you can give me some feedback on our PR. That'd be great.
Do you put deprecation notes in your pull requests?
Yeah, well, we put them in the code.
Think about putting them in the pull request itself, the description. So along with, hey, I'm going to make the code change. Here's the public facing, like, how do I, like, what should I fix after I get this code in? So it'll be part of the changelog really easily.
Yeah, I think first we need to figure out the changelog stuff, but then yeah, we can make it fancy. But like we don't even have like a manual changelog right now. So like
baby steps.
Baby steps.
Yeah.
I have a bit of a question there. Actually,
we're a 3-year-old who can't walk yet.
We're talking changelogs now, and I didn't see much in the document about changelogs and about human readable changelogs, and I don't think we have time for it now. But do you mind if I maybe read a small paragraph about this in the doc?
Please do. That'd be lovely. I would love that. Thank you so much. This doc is for y'all as well. So if you, for any reason, don't have permission, please let me know. I'll be happy to grant it. Add any thoughts or notes that you would like, and please share links in the resources section that you found helpful. And I've made this public, so hopefully anyone can take a peek at it if they have thoughts as well, if you want to share it.
Cool.
That's awesome.
Great. All right. Well, thanks y'all. Thanks for this doing this experiment with us. This was a lot of fun, and it was really wonderful to see you all.
Love it. All right.
See you guys.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Everyone.